Welcome back to Dentro la Storia, the channel for those who love contemporary history, and happy May Day, happy International Workers' Day. Precisely to commemorate International Workers' Day, today we thought of bringing you a very tough story, but one that confirms the willpower of those who, with sweat and hard work, earn a living. As they used to say in the past, even when facing death, even when facing terrorism. Today's story is a very particular one. It's not very well known in Italy, but it is in Spain. It's a story that goes back almost half a century. It was 1977 exactly. January 24th, 1977. In a Spain still dealing with what is called the transition. That is the shift from the Francoist period to the complete return to democracy. A terrorist commando storms an office on Calle de Atocha, right in the center of Madrid, to carry out a massacre of lawyers and unionists. The goal is to spread terror, to push Spain backwards, to bring it back to Francoism, to provoke such a chaotic reaction that it calls for a return to order, order understood as a military dictatorship. But the strong, clear, determined, composed, and civil response from Spanish workers, the unions, and the citizens of Madrid ruins the plans of these adversaries. Let's tell this story, a very particular story, a story that deserves to be known. The night of January 24th, 1977, represents one of the darkest and most decisive chapters in contemporary Spanish history. In the midst of the transition from Francoist dictatorship to parliamentary democracy, a terrorist commando storms a law office in the heart of Madrid on Calle de Atocha. They open fire on a group of trade unionists and lawyers, all connected to the workers' movement. The final toll is dramatic: 5 dead and 4 seriously injured, in addition to the sheer brutality of the act. The Atocha Massacre takes on particular significance when placed in a broader context, that of European political violence in the 1970s, a pattern of violence characterized by transnational networks, clandestine arms trafficking, and ideological connections between like-minded groups. In this video, we delve not only into the dynamics of the attack, but also into the origins of the attack itself, including the weapons used, and the role, direct or indirect, of certain external elements, specifically Italian ones, within a political climate that made that brutal massacre possible. To understand this, we need to look further back in history. Upon Francisco Franco's death, in 1975, when Spain began an extremely delicate process of political transformation, Franco had definitively come to power with the Civil War, with the victory in 1939. The transition from an authoritarian regime, like the Francoist one, to a pluralist democracy, with the participation once again of all political parties. It takes place in a context of strong social tensions, with widespread strikes, workers' demands, and a growing political mobilization. In 1977, the Communist Party was still in an ambiguous position. Until the previous April, it had still been formally illegal, but in fact it had become influential within society. The workers' commissions, which at the time represented the heart of the union movement, and were often in conflict with employers and conservative sectors, were the public face of the Spanish Communist Party's union involvement. At the same time, however, far-right groups made up of Francoist nostalgics, former members of repressive structures, radicalized young soldiers, and Italian exiles were trying to stop the democratic process through violence. This phenomenon was not isolated. It was part of a European context marked by something we have already seen, the so-called strategy of tension. The law firm, located at 55 Calle de Atocha, is a point of reference for workers and trade unionists at the beginning of 1977. The lawyers who work there defend persecuted activists, dismissed workers, and even imprisoned soldiers. The work has a deeply political dimension. In fact, it helps to dismantle, through the law, and therefore in a peaceful and democratic way, the unhealthy legacies of the Francoist system. Legacies that are very difficult to remove completely. Because after almost 40 years of Francoism, Spanish society, especially the less educated and less cultured segments, had known nothing but Francisco Franco's system. The fact is that the work of this law firm exposes it, making him a prime target, especially for the far right, for those nostalgic for Francoism. Targeting those lawyers means attacking the legal and symbolic infrastructure of the workers' movement. On the evening of January 24, 1977, an armed group storms into the office. Inside, there are still several lawyers and union members. They're there working late. They're all unarmed. No one expects a raid like that. The terrorists, after securing the entrance and identifying those present, gather the lawyers and union members and open fire at close range. The action is swift, planned, and ruthless. 5 die, and another 4 are seriously injured. The goal is not simply to eliminate specific people, but rather to send an intimidating message to the entire democratic movement. The message is, Francoism is still alive. Francoism wants to survive. Francoism doesn't care about anyone, not even unarmed people. When the investigations begin, one of the most relevant but also controversial aspects concerns the origin of the weapons used by the commando. The attackers use Ingram brand semi-automatic submachine guns, a foreign brand, mainly used within the Spanish police forces. This alone raises some red flags about what really happened, about who wanted to target those lawyers and those union members. Judicial investigations and later historical reconstructions have shown that these weapons were modified in a clandestine laboratory controlled by the police, which supplied Francoist movements also through the work of foreign agents. One of them is an Italian nuclear engineer. His name is Eliodoro Pomar. He fled to Spain together with Stefano Delle Chiaie and many other neo-fascists because he is wanted in Italy. He is wanted for terrorism, membership in an armed gang, attempt to reconstitute the dissolved fascist party. Pomar in Madrid seeks to work in a nuclear power plant. But in the meantime, he gets by as best he can and offers his technical expertise to modify those Ingram submachine guns for the commando that opened fire on Atocha Street. Subsequent investigations and studies have revealed several contacts, more or less direct, between the circles of the Spanish far right and the Italian neo-fascist groups, because it's not just Eliodoro Pomar. At that time in Madrid, the Black Orchestra gathered. That's what the press called it, which is not the same Black Orchestra that tried to kill Hitler on July 20th, 1944. It's just a phonetic similarity. It's obviously not the same. We're talking about the former members of the Ginter Press we've already met. Ralph Singerin Serac, also known as Yves Guilloux, and his entire group, who after leaving Lisbon following the Carnation Revolution, found asylum in Spain. And then there are the Italian neo-fascists. They escaped from Italian prisons or from the possibility of being arrested following various investigations. The investigations into Piazza Fontana, the investigations into Piazza della Loggia, the investigations into the attack on the Milan police headquarters, the investigations into the Atocha Massacre, the investigations into the Patieno Massacre, all massacres. The Italian neo-fascists who were not arrested all escaped to Spain because they still count on the protection of those state apparatuses that had been blessed and protected by Francoism, and that still had a rather strong grip on Spanish institutions. Post-Franco Spain was seen by some Italian neo-fascist circles as both a refuge and a strategic resource, a place to counter the advance of democracy and defend an authoritarian political model. Not even the Greek military junta had withstood the blow. That Greece had even financed part of the neo-fascist drift in Italy. It had also trained them. The Greek military junta collapsed after the Cyprus adventure of 1974. Spain, during the transition period, was seen as the last stronghold, the last bastion to take refuge in. And it is right there, in this hotbed between dying Francoism and neo-fascism on the run, that several opportunities for a dirty war develop. A dirty war that leads Italian neo-fascists to intervene in other actions as well, for example in the clandestine war against the Basque separatists of ETA, or in the repression of the Carlist movement, the followers of a branch rival to the reigning House of Bourbon, who initially sided with the Francoists and then broke away from them, actually becoming opponents of Francoism. In all these cases, Italian operatives is constantly exploited simply to bring death and pain. But let's go back to the massacre on Atocha Street. The goal is terror. Not only that, the goal is to shake Spanish public opinion and push it at all costs to react in a disorderly way, to attack the institutions, and therefore to provoke a reaction from the army, which is still heavily infiltrated by Francoist elements. But the response of Spanish civil society is immediate and extraordinary. The funeral of the victims turns into a massive composed demonstration, marked by disciplined silence and broad participation. Apart from the Francoists, all other political groups participate in silence, expressing composed grief. The behavior of the Communist Party, which was the real target of the Calle de Atocha commando, is decisive. Instead of reacting with violence, instead of demanding someone's head, instead of giving in to revenge, the Spanish Communist Party calls for calm. It helps to prevent escalation. That escalation could have destabilized the country. This attitude strengthens the legitimacy of the party and accelerates its legalization, which happened shortly before. Paradoxically, the massacre helps to consolidate the democratic process. It's the opposite effect of what the attackers wanted. Not chaos, not a reaction from the military. Democracy comes out stronger, stabilized, determined not to be overwhelmed by the resurgence of Francoism. The Atocha Massacre cannot be fully understood without placing it in the context of European political violence in the 1970s. We've already said it. In several countries, extremist groups used violence to influence political processes. But Spain, which had become one of the theaters of this complex dynamic, offers a different response. No coup d'etat. No pretext for a coup d'etat. In fact, it seems as though we are seeing again the scenes from the funeral of the victims of the Piazza Fontana bombing in Milan, December 12, 1969. An entire city comes to a halt, honoring the victims in silence, without giving in to reckless acts. Over time, the Atocha Massacre has become a symbol of the struggle for democracy. However, its interpretation has evolved over time, including greater attention to the international dimensions of political violence. The most recent studies emphasize that the transition was not a linear and peaceful process, but a period marked by deep tensions, in which internal as well as external actors interacted in complex ways. The issue of international neo-fascist networks continues to be the subject of research, even within the judiciary. The work of the Milanese magistrate Guido Salvini has shed light on all of this and has contributed to a more detailed understanding of the event. The massacre on Calle de Atocha, January 24, 1977, therefore represents a turning point in Spanish history, but also in European history. Not because of its brutality, but because of the connections that led to it and the reactions that followed. Ultimately, the reaction of Spanish society, able to turn a tragedy into a movement of unity, remains one of the most significant elements of this story. The memory of Atocha has been kept alive by the survivors who testified about what happened that night. The memory of the murdered lawyers is still alive. It's a memory that cannot be erased. It is an extremely heavy legacy not only in Spain, but across the entire continent, especially in the lives of workers. Those workers who today are actually celebrating their holiday. A holiday that aims to reaffirm not only the right to work, but also the right to dignity at work. This is the true legacy, the real inheritance of Calle de Atocha. Much more than the people arrested, all members of the far-right movements, Fuerza Nueva and Guerreros de Cristo Rey. All this makes us understand that when faced with violence, When faced with the will to suppress rights, those rights that are the foundation of our daily lives, there is only one real way to react: to show that violence is never the solution, to show that violence is never the method, to show that the rule of law is the foundation of civic life, to show that human dignity cannot be denied with bullets. This is the final lesson of Atocha, and today we remember it, along with that huge funeral that accompanied the victims, together with the survivors, some of whom were left marked for life by scars, wounds, and paralysis. We must remember all this because if the dignity of work exists and if democracy exists, we owe it in part to this as well. Article 1 of our Constitution states, "The Italian Republic is a democracy based on work. Work is a fundamental value for everyone." Being able to work, rolling up your sleeves, coming home in the evening tired but happy to have done something and to have helped support your own family, but also to the progress of society. It should be a great reward, something that always deserves to be remembered and valued. I once again wish all workers, all working women, and all of you who follow us my best wishes, and I look forward to seeing you in the next videos here on Dentro la Storia.